劫持，这无耻就活人马出去了，对吧？
I used to work 12-hour shifts in a factory that made electronics for American consumers. Now, the orders have stopped and my factory is closed. I haven't seen a paycheck in over a month. I don't know how I'll feed my family. The government keeps saying the economy's fine, but I can see with my own eyes that it's falling apart. The tariffs have destroyed everything I worked for. Li Ping, former factory worker, Shenzhen. China's warehouses are overflowing, exports are frozen, and the country's logistics system is buckling under pressure. Ever since the US slapped a shocking 104% tariff on Chinese goods in April, the ripple effects have spiraled into a full-blown economic crisis. Beijing claims everything is under control, but on the ground it's a very different story. How did tariffs trigger a full-scale logistics meltdown? Why is Beijing claiming stability as chaos spreads? And what's really happening behind China's closed doors? It all started on April 2nd, with a press conference that caught both markets and governments off guard. President Donald Trump announced a 34% tariff on all Chinese imports, effective immediately. His justification? China's been robbing us blind for decades, he said. This is payback. Markets jolted, shipping companies scrambled, and in China, a quiet panic began to spread. Within hours, major ports like Shenzhen, Ningbo, and Qingdao reported an unusual surge in containers being turned away. Goods that were already en route to the US were now subject to massive price hikes. Deals collapsed and clients pulled out. Chinese exporters, many operating on razor-thin margins, found themselves instantly unprofitable. We spoke with Chen Rui, a freight forwarder in Guangzhou, who described the chaos.
那就是许多适龄的男性仍然单身着，他们被称为
On April 1st, I had 63 containers scheduled for departure. By April 3rd, only 9 went through. Everything else was either canceled or delayed indefinitely. Clients in the US said they couldn't afford the new costs. Just like that, my entire month's work vanished. But this wasn't just about shipments. It was the first domino in a supply chain breakdown that no one, not even seasoned trade analysts, had fully anticipated. China hit back on April 4th with a mirror response, 34% tariffs on key US imports like soybeans, cars, and semiconductors. State media labeled it a measured and firm counterstrike. But behind the scenes, signs of stress were already visible. In Yiwu, a city known for mass-producing small consumer goods for export, local businesses were reporting unsold inventory piling up. Trucks that used to move goods daily were suddenly sitting idle. Port customs in Shanghai saw a 27% increase in inspection delays, according to leaked internal data shared by a shipping union rep. And this was only the beginning. By April 4th, Beijing was publicly projecting strength. Officials insisted the Chinese economy was strong, flexible, and well-positioned to withstand external shocks, but exporters we contacted said otherwise. Frantic calls from US clients were pouring in, trying to renegotiate deals or cancel them outright. The silence from officials didn't reassure anyone. If anything, it made things feel worse. This early phase, the first 72 hours, set the tone. What looked like a tit-for-tat policy move on the surface was already igniting something far more dangerous beneath, an unraveling of the logistics machinery that had powered China's rise for decades. And just days later, things would explode again, not with negotiations, not with de-escalation, but with a second blow, one no one in China was ready for. But just when exporters thought they could regroup, Washington dropped a second hammer, and this time, it shattered more than just trade deals. On April 9th, the US Trade Office issued a sudden update. Tariffs on Chinese goods are no longer just 34%. They're being raised to a staggering 104%, effective immediately. Trump doesn't wait for a congressional debate. He calls it Phase 2, claiming Chinese retaliation proved his point. They don't respect fair trade, so we're hitting back harder. In China, the impact is instant and brutal. By the morning of April 10th, shipping orders collapsed. Thousands of exporters cancel shipments mid-process. Ports in Ningbo and Shenzhen shift from active loading zones to crowded parking lots of unused containers. Customs offices grind to a crawl under a flood of last-minute declarations, disputes, and pleas from exporters trying to beat the new tariff deadline. Few succeed. In response, China retaliates again, this time with 125% tariffs on a new batch of US goods, including electronics, meat, and chemicals. But Beijing's tone changes. It stops calling this a strategic adjustment and begins referring to it as an external threat to Chinese sovereignty. Behind closed doors, however, urgency turns into panic. Yi Shui, a warehouse supervisor in Dongguan, describes the moment it hits them.
社会现象，那就是许多适龄的男性仍然单身着。他们
We had just cleared enough space for a week's worth of shipments. Then the phone started ringing, orders canceled, payments frozen. Within 3 days, our entire facility was full again. We don't have room for even one more crate. This isn't a slowdown, it's a hard stop. With exports stalled, China's trucking network starts to break down. Drivers, already operating under tight margins, are told to wait. Some go unpaid, others are stranded for days near major ports with no loads to carry. We speak to one of them, surnamed Wen, a long-haul trucker from Hunan who drove to Shenzhen expecting cargo.
表现展示自己的，如果从这个角度来说的话，那算是内向。
I've slept in my cab for 5 nights. I don't get paid unless I drive. But there's nothing to move. They just told us to wait. Wait for what? His frustration is shared by thousands across the country. Social media fills with images of idle trucks, long lines at warehouses, and growing mountains of untouched inventory. But within hours, most of those posts are scrubbed from Weibo and Douyin. And yet, official statements remain upbeat. State outlets insist China's economy is on track, and even highlight new trade deals with Brazil and Iran, as if these can replace the US overnight. Economists on government payrolls talk about structural resilience and domestic consumption strength, but no one on the factory floors is buying it. A mid-level manager at a mid-sized electronics firm in Suzhou, speaking under anonymity, puts it plainly.
1.5的话，它的体重如果体脂是正常合理的范围，它应该在100。
Everyone's scared, but no one's allowed to say it. Half our shipments go to the US. We're losing customers we've had for 10 years. The government tells us to be patient, but how do you stay patient when your warehouse is full and your workers are packing up their lockers? By April 10th, the logistics crisis has moved from port cities to manufacturing hubs, and now it's crawling inland. The system isn't just congested, it's jammed, and every day without movement costs companies more. In a country where just-in-time logistics has become the lifeblood of its manufacturing economy, this sudden paralysis is nothing short of catastrophic. But what comes next isn't just gridlock, it's a full-blown overflow as China's warehouses begin to collapse under their own weight. By April 11th, it was no longer just a slowdown or a backlog, it was a logistical implosion. Warehouses across China's coastal provinces are bursting at the seams. In Shanghai, drone footage leaked to foreign media shows container yards so full that drivers are being turned away at the gate. In Shenzhen, one third-party logistics center reports it's operating at 140% capacity with no exit strategy in sight. The crisis spreads quickly. With nothing leaving the ports, factory inventories swell, forcing some production lines to halt altogether. Textile, electronics, auto parts, goods designed for rapid movement, are now sitting idle. And when the boxes stop moving, so does the economy. Project 44, a global logistics data firm, reports that ocean bookings from China to the US plummet by 60%. Carriers begin canceling sailings, first weekly, then daily. One analyst calls it the most sudden and severe breakdown in Chinese freight exports since COVID. In Wuxi, we reach out to Lin Meng, a 27-year-old factory worker who was laid off without notice on April 14th.
是因为我们2个是来自于泉州嘛。
Our supervisor said it was temporary, but 2 days later, we got our final checks. They said the warehouse was too full. There was nothing left to pack. Lin isn't alone. According to unofficial counts from worker advocacy groups, over 50,000 factory jobs vanish in Jiangsu province within 1 week. Most workers are told it's just a pause, but no one believes it. Inland provinces aren't spared. In Chengdu, shipments meant for export are rerouted to temporary holding facilities, but these fill up just as fast. A network of state-owned warehouses designed for disaster response is now being quietly converted into overflow storage for stranded exports. And yet, the state maintains its position. The economy remains stable, supply chain adjustments are progressing smoothly. Meanwhile, voices trying to share the real picture are being silenced. A young woman from Zhejiang posts a viral video showing hundreds of idle workers sitting outside a shuttered warehouse. Within hours, the video disappears and her account is suspended. Another post from a truck driver complaining about unpaid wages is marked as misinformation by Chinese state censors. Behind the censorship, desperation festers. We speak to Chao Jun, a 46-year-old logistics manager in Tianjin, who says he's never seen this level of dysfunction.
普遍20万左右吧。 当然沙漠风
We're moving containers from one warehouse to another, not to ship them, just to buy time. It's musical chairs, but no one's playing music anymore, just silence. Companies start turning to alternative routes through Vietnam, Malaysia, even the Russian Far East, but these networks are nowhere near large enough to absorb China's volume. Border bottlenecks develop within days, transport costs spike, and even then, many of those alternate markets can't offer the pricing or demand that the US once did. China's domestic media shifts focus. Rather than address the crisis directly, newscasts highlight booming exports to friendly nations, touting marginal growth with countries like Pakistan and South Africa. State economists say the rebalancing of trade is working, but on the ground, businesses are collapsing. Liu Hong, a small-time exporter from Yiwu, puts it bluntly.
10多岁到30岁之前，这个年龄阶段就是要结婚的时候了。如果超过这个年龄阶段的话，就大不。
They tell us to look for new markets, but you can't just replace the US market with a wave of the hand. We spent 10 years building that trust. It's gone now, and no one's telling us what to do next. There's also growing fear that China's zero layoff policy, once proudly enforced by party officials during downturns, is quietly being abandoned. In the absence of orders, managers are making cuts. And in cities that once powered China's rise, there's a new sound, silence in the workshops and whispers in the streets. But while warehouses keep overflowing and factories go dark, the human toll is only beginning to show on the streets, in the homes, and in the lives of the people who built China's export machine. By April 21st, the situation grew even direr. What was initially a shipping crisis has morphed into a widespread economic breakdown that no amount of government spin can hide. Factories across China are going dark. In Shenzhen, one of China's largest tech hubs, workers in the electronics factories are sent home early, their production lines silenced. A manager at a major smartphone assembly plant reveals,
那就是许多适龄的男性仍然单身着。他们被称为
The tariff hikes have wiped out our US orders. Now we're waiting for the government to step in, but they're too busy talking about growth in other markets. In Dongguan, once a thriving center of toy manufacturing, the scene is just as bleak. Liu Wei, a factory supervisor, tells us that the factory has reduced its workforce by 40%.
接着这无持续或者卖出去了，对吧？
I've worked here for 12 years. The company can't keep paying us if there's nothing to make. There's talk of a reorganization, but the government's press releases sound like they're talking about a different country. For many workers, the sudden shift is more than just a job loss. It's a blow to the heart of their lives. In Suzhou, where a large number of textile workers live in factory-owned dormitories, there's a sense of betrayal as people pack up their belongings. A 32-year-old worker named Zhao Lian tells us,
其实我们这个年代，或者说在00后出生的人当中，大家一直都坚信靠别人不如靠自己。
We've been told it's temporary, but how long can we wait without any pay? The government says we should look to local markets for work, but the factories here are all closing. As more factories shut down, migrants from rural areas, who make up the backbone of China's manufacturing industry, find themselves in limbo. With no work and no money, thousands are stranded in cities far from home. One woman, Ying Fang, who came from Hunan to work in a Shanghai garment factory, says,
你们可以展示给我们一下你们是怎么发那个中文信息的。
I'm stuck here with nothing. The trains are still running, but I can't afford a ticket back. They told us to wait, but I don't know how much longer I can. Despite the growing economic devastation, Beijing continues to broadcast a false sense of normalcy. China's Ministry of Commerce announces that the government will be investing heavily in high-tech industries, touting an optimistic future based on domestic consumption and green innovation. Yet for those living in China's manufacturing heartlands, these statements are increasingly disconnected from the daily reality. On April 28th, an online post from a young factory worker in Wuxi perfectly encapsulates the frustration that's beginning to spread. The government says we need to shift to a domestic market, but how can I buy more when I don't even have enough to eat? The post goes viral despite censors' best efforts. Within hours, Why Should China Collapse begins trending on social media as the disconnect between state media and the lived reality of workers becomes impossible to ignore. In the factories, it's clear that not all Chinese citizens have the same access to the resources being promised by the government. Qin Jun, a 40-year-old factory manager in Hangzhou, is blunt.
是因为我们两个是来自于泉州嘛。
The government is giving money to big tech companies, but they don't understand the problem at the grassroots level. We're all just waiting to be told what comes next, and so far, no one has the answer. But as the economic fallout deepens and workers face an uncertain future, the real test is about to unfold on the streets, where the cracks in the system begin to widen, and the impact of the tariff war hits hardest. By May 1st, the optimism coming from Beijing had all but evaporated. Government-led initiatives to support small businesses and workers in the face of the tariff war begin to look more like hollow promises. In cities like Shanghai and Beijing, the government rolls out new relief packages, promising subsidies for struggling companies. But these initiatives are met with skepticism and frustration. On the streets of Shenzhen, a group of displaced factory workers gather outside a local government building, demanding answers. One of them, Zhou Tian, who worked in the electronics sector, tells us, They keep saying they're giving us aid, but we haven't seen anything yet. They told us to wait for the new job training programs, but what's the point of training when there are no jobs? Social unrest is beginning to brew. While Beijing maintains its rhetoric about long-term stability, the situation on the ground is anything but stable. Protests erupt sporadically across smaller cities, especially in Zhejiang and Guangdong, where factory closures have hit the hardest. In Yiwu, a well-known market city, vendors who once thrived on supplying the U.S. market are now struggling to survive. Wang Li, who's been selling toys to American buyers for over a decade, explains, I can't pay my workers. They're asking if we can still sell to the U.S. I tell them I don't know. We used to export to America every day. Now it's been weeks and I don't have a single order. By May 3rd, street protests gained traction. In Guangzhou, retail workers from the textile sector marched toward the local government offices. They carry signs that read, Where's the stability? And we need jobs, not empty promises. In Shenzhen, similar scenes unfold. Workers in the high-tech and consumer goods industries are feeling the weight of unpaid wages and shuttered factories. In response, the Chinese government tightens censorship on social media. Posts critical of the government's handling of the economy are quickly removed, and accounts reporting on protests are disappearing overnight. Yet the frustration on the streets continues to build. Workers, once reliant on the state's promises of protection and growth, are now questioning everything. Liu Jian, a 35-year-old truck driver in Tianjin, tells us, I've been driving trucks for 13 years, hauling goods from factories to ports. Now everything's stopped. The government says we're still strong, but I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm losing everything. Food prices start to rise as the national supply chain breaks down. In many areas, local markets are seeing supply shortages due to the failure of internal logistics. The government tries to quell panic by assuring that grain imports from nations like Brazil and Ukraine will cover the shortfall. But the real problem lies with more essential goods like electronics and household items, goods that have always depended on smooth trade routes to and from the U.S. As China grapples with this internal chaos, the gap between government narratives and the lived realities of its citizens has never been wider. State-controlled media still claims that the economy is on track for a moderate recovery, but that line grows less convincing with each passing day. Reports from the People's Bank of China announce small cuts in interest rates, but these measures seem too late for the workers who are now without jobs or wages. But while the streets of China begin to stir with anger, it's the stark reality of a nation's crumbling logistics that's now catching the world's attention. And the true extent of the tariffs' devastation is only just becoming clear. By May 6, it was clear that the tariff war's effects are no longer just an economic crisis. They've become a social one. The streets are full of displaced workers, and factories continue to collapse under the weight of stagnating orders. Local governments, once seen as beacons of stability, are now scrambling to put out fires. In Hunan, local officials tried to calm protests by offering one-time payments to workers, but the promises of new job opportunities fall flat. Liu Hua, a 40-year-old machinist from Changsha, puts it bluntly. They're giving us a little bit of money to make us quiet, but it's not enough to live on. What are we supposed to do with a few hundred yuan when everything's closing down around us? In Foshan, the government has resorted to shutting down entire neighborhoods to contain the protests. Armed police patrol the streets, while local residents try to find any form of work to keep food on their tables. But the answer is always the same. Nothing is available. Many businesses that once thrived on exports to the US are now lying dormant, unable to pivot to other markets. On May 7th, the People's Daily publishes a statement calling the economic rebalancing a success, touting domestic innovation and new trade agreements with Russia. Yet, as these articles flood the Chinese internet, the reactions are growing more cynical by the hour. In Nanjing, Luo Wei, a 29-year-old former factory worker, says, "The government says we're in a recovery, but we see no sign of it. I think the rest of the world knows the truth. We don't have jobs, we don't have goods to sell, and we don't know how much longer we can go on like this." In Beijing, whispers of unrest are growing. Locals are disillusioned by the official line that the economy will recover in the long term, while their daily lives crumble. Penny Wu, a former export sales manager now struggling to make ends meet in Beijing, says,
表现展示自己的，如果从这个角度来说的话，那算是内向。
Every time I try to make a change in my life, the government keeps offering empty promises. It's like they don't understand the problem. The world has changed, but they're still stuck in the past. As the government tightens control over media and censors posts questioning the official narrative, the underground black market begins to thrive. People start hoarding goods, and on the streets of Xi'an, items that were once readily available are now being sold at inflated prices. In Chongqing, small businesses are selling imported goods at enormous markups, providing a rare and sometimes desperate outlet for citizens to buy items once commonplace. Yet despite these underground markets springing up, the official economic machinery of China remains in crisis. More businesses fail, especially those relying on the US market. Global logistics companies are pulling out of Chinese ports due to the uncertainty surrounding tariffs, and those that remain are experiencing delays 3 times longer than before. At the same time, tensions between China and the US reach a new high. The Biden administration threatens to increase tariffs even further unless China shows a measurable reduction in trade imbalances, putting even more pressure on an already fragile economy. Chinese officials, meanwhile, continue to present a facade of stability. Premier Li Keqiang assures the public that the worst is over and that China will remain a dominant force in the global economy. But the cracks in the story are becoming ever more visible. But while the government continues to paint a rosy picture of recovery, the truth is becoming harder to deny. And for the people living through it, the costs of the tariff war have only just begun to unfold. The final toll of this war will not just be measured in trade deficits, but in the lives of those left to pick up the pieces. May 10th, the depths of the crisis have become undeniable. China's economic collapse is no longer a distant possibility, but a harsh reality for millions of people. The effects of the US tariffs are no longer a problem for factories alone. They are now affecting everyday lives in ways that cannot be hidden or ignored. Across the country, it's clear that the government's optimistic narrative has failed to hold water. In Hunan, another wave of factory closures forces thousands of workers to take to the streets once again. Liu Jie, a 28-year-old textile worker, says, "I have no idea what's going to happen to me now. Every day I hear more stories of friends who are out of work. They say things will improve, but I don't see how." Meanwhile, in Beijing, the government's reassurances seem to be falling on deaf ears. Wang Ming, a small business owner, reflects, "They keep saying we should focus on the domestic market, but it's impossible when we can't even get basic goods to sell. I can barely pay my rent anymore. I don't think I can last much longer." The massive logistics breakdowns that have plagued China since the tariffs were first enacted are now causing nationwide shortages. From Shanghai's ports to Hong Kong's warehouses, goods meant for both domestic and international markets are piling up, unable to be delivered on time. The supply chain crisis has now hit a critical point as transportation companies and warehouses become overwhelmed by the backlog. Xiao Wei, a logistics manager in Hangzhou, tells us, "Our warehouse is filled to capacity. We can't move anything because we have no space and no trucks to transport goods. We've been stuck like this for weeks." In Guangdong, the situation has become even more dire. The local government promises temporary relief, but it does nothing to fix the deep structural problems caused by the tariffs. Zhao Qiang, a small business owner in Dongguan, describes the impact. "I used to be able to send shipments daily. Now, even though my products are ready, I can't find any way to get them out. Everything is stuck and I can't pay my employees. We're all just waiting for a miracle." Across the nation, the frustration is palpable. In Xi'an, the black market for essential goods continues to grow as citizens turn to unofficial channels to obtain items that have disappeared from store shelves. The prices are higher, the quality is questionable, but people are desperate. Yang Li, a mother of 3 in Chengdu, shares, "We don't know where to turn. I had to buy rice from a neighbor at double the price. We can't survive like this. The government keeps promising relief, but we haven't seen anything." Despite the seriousness of the crisis, the Chinese Communist Party continues to insist that the nation is resilient and that the worst is over. Official statements continue to tout economic reforms and new trade agreements with countries like Russia and Pakistan. But those promises feel hollow when they don't translate into any immediate relief for the millions of Chinese workers struggling to survive. On May 10th, as frustration boils over and more protests erupt across the country, the question remains, who will bear the true cost of this tariff war? The Chinese government's claim of success in weathering the storm rings increasingly false. Li Yun, a 45-year-old woman who worked for over 20 years in a garment factory, sums it up. "I don't believe them anymore. They said the tariffs would be a temporary problem, but for us, it feels permanent. And now, we're the ones paying the price." As the world watches, China's crisis shows no signs of abating. For millions of workers, the true toll of the US tariff war has just begun, and its devastating impact is far from over.